What we're going to do today is go over some information to practice stuff that we've already learned and talk about things I've seen on the assignment that need to be fixed. And then we're going to talk about the introduction and conclusion of your research paper. And we're going to talk about the work that you've already done. Topic sentences. Suppose I was writing a paragraph about whales. Let's see, I'll just open up Word here and share this with you. All right, suppose I was writing a paragraph about whales and I was writing about their body, and I had a fused outline that had some information about flippers and blowhole, some points about the baleen plates, some points about their fins and flukes, and I don't know, maybe some information about being mammals. And so I'm going to write a paragraph about the whale's body, all from this fused outline with all that information. And so I write my first, I look at my fused outline and I see that my first piece of information on the fused outline is about their flippers and blowholes. And so I write my very first sentence of my paragraph and it says, whales have flippers and blowholes. That's my topic sentence. What can I talk about in this paragraph if I have that as a topic sentence?
Flippers and blowholes.
That's right. I can only talk about the flippers and the blowholes. I can't talk about the baleen plates. I can't talk about blubber. I can't talk about, what is that they have that has the different colors that they spot them with?
Tail fluke? Their flukes?
Yeah, their flukes. Yeah, I can't talk about their flukes. I can't talk about anything. If I start out saying whales have flippers and blowholes, that's all I can talk about. So what do I need in my topic, for my topic sentence, if I want to be able to talk flippers, blowholes, flukes, baleen plates, blubber? What kind of topic sentence could I have? Because this won't do if I want to talk about all those things.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe something like whales have amazing bodies.
Okay, whales have amazing bodies. Okay, now I can talk about their blowholes. Now I can talk about each one has a uniquely patterned fluke. Okay. Now this is obviously a terrible paragraph. I'm not using any style whatsoever. They have tremendous amounts of blubber. That is amazing, considering that they eat teeny little creatures filtered through their baleen plates. Okay, can I talk about all that now?
Yes.
I can. And now what else would I need? Just suppose I had some really good style and some extra sentences explaining all this stuff. What would I need here at the very end?
Girls.
A clincher.
Okay, can you think of something? It doesn't have to be the greatest clincher in the world, because obviously this isn't the greatest paragraph in the world.
The bodies of whales are amazing.
Okay, can you use a different word besides amazing since we've already used that?
Extraordinary.
Okay. All right. So this has to cover all of the information that is in your paragraph. And again, when you're looking at your fused outline, don't just look at the little individual pieces of information. Whatever your topic sentence is, has to take into account all of the information, because whatever you put down for that first sentence is going to limit what can be discussed in that paragraph. Okay? And really, it's so that your reader has got a very difficult job. Your reader has to have lots of clues so that they can keep up with all the information that you're sharing with them. So this is a signal to your reader. This paragraph is about whales' bodies, so they don't have to try to figure out what your paragraph is about. And all of our writing has plenty of clues that tie the different sections together so our reader can fully understand what we're trying to say. If you just randomly put down information in whatever order you feel like putting it down in, it's not going to make sense to your reader. So that's what all of these structure techniques are for. It's so your writing will have unity and it'll make sense when people go to read it. Okay? And if you can master this technique of always having a good, clear topic sentence, and then the other things we're going to learn to do, you won't have any trouble with writing when you're in college or any other situation where you need to be able to write. And there are plenty of other situations besides school kinds of situations where it's important to be able to write well. So let's see, the topic sentence was one thing that I found that we needed to work on. Now, let's look at, we'll go ahead and talk about our introduction and conclusion in case we don't have time to do some of the extra things I want to do today, but I'm going to try. So turn to page 32 in your handbook. Okay. Now, writing an introduction and conclusion to a report or to an essay is a special project. It's different from all the other paragraphs. And have any of you ever had the experience of writing an introduction and trying to come up with something interesting to say, but you felt like it was just very, very boring and you didn't really know what to say in the introduction to make it good? Have any of you ever experienced that before?
No, but that has happened to me with conclusion.
Okay. All right. Conclusions are also very hard, but what I really like about this way of writing introductions and conclusions is it gives you a particular way of doing it so that the most important parts of your paper are, guess what? The beginning and the end. If you don't have an interesting way of starting, people are just not going to want to read what you've written. And when you finish, you want them to feel that everything has been wrapped up very well. And so that's what we're going to learn to do with introduction and conclusion. So if you look at page 32, this is the basic outline for how we go about writing an introduction and conclusion. The first thing is Don't ever refer to yourself or your reader by using I or you or we. And also don't ever refer to your own writing in your introduction and conclusion. Anywhere really, but people tend to want to do this in the introduction and conclusion. So in our introduction, the first thing we want to do is to catch our reader's attention. We don't want to start out in a boring way. We want our first sentence to be a really good one, and we're going to talk about that, some ways we can do that in just a minute. The second thing we're going to do is to give general or background information which is not going to be found anywhere else in your report body. So for instance, if you had been writing the whale report and you had been going to write an introduction or conclusion, I think all of you did sad history of whales, body, and migration, right? For your report?
It said in the those three, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Okay, so if you did that for your whale report, then there's all kinds of other information that you could use in your introduction if you had been writing an introduction, which I did not ask you to do. There's lots of interesting information about whales that you could put in your introduction. What's some of the interesting information that we didn't use in those three topics? Do you remember something interesting in the whale mini books that we could have used possibly for an introduction? Yes, Sammy.
wasn't there something about singing?
Yes, that and the acrobatics was my favorite part. So if I were writing a whale report and I didn't use that in my report body, I probably would want to use that in my introduction because it's very interesting and people would probably like to read about that. So I want you to think for just a minute about your three topics that you used for your research report that you've already written. There's probably some interesting information in there that didn't go with any of those three topics. And that would be really good information to put in your introduction. But we can't stop with that. So if you look back again on page 32, we do need to narrow our way down to our three topics and let our reader know what we're particularly going to be talking about in the paper. So let's see. Sammy, I think you were the one doing whales, the blue, the gray, and the beluga?
Beluga.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you know what information you've used so far. So for your introduction, you might give some information about, well, anything about whales that you haven't already talked about. So for instance, maybe a story, an interesting story about whales. Did you run across anything like that while you were doing your report?
No.
Like some personal stories or no? You could also give some general information about the scientific classification of whales if you wanted to. What family are they in? You know, the fact that they're mammals, the fact that they're related. Huh?
I could do something with, like, reference Moby Dick because I think it's a blue whale in there.
Yes, you could. That would be amazing. Great idea. Okay. Let's see. Molly, tell me what you did. What are your three topics?
Body, habitat, and diet.
Of what?
Of
what?
Polar bear.
Polar bear.
polar bears. Okay. So you could do some information. Now, I'm not saying you have to. These are just ideas, okay? You could do information about Eskimos and their relationship to polar bears. You could do scientific information about polar bears and the fact that, you know, where they fall in the classification system if you wanted to. You could pick some other thing about polar bears that isn't one of your 3 topics and talk about that, just for some extra interesting information. Okay? And Julia, tell me again what you did.
I did mammal.
No, what's the topic first?
Oh, I did dolphins,
Okay?
and for the topics I did mammal, physical characteristics, and the social behavior.
Okay. Now, when you did mammal and physical characteristics, just you've got to make sure that your information doesn't kind of mush together, because some of those physical characteristics have to do with being a mammal. Okay, so one thing that you need to do is make sure you keep those topics really well separated. But assuming that you did, you could talk about the dolphin show at SeaWorld, or you could talk about, did you ever see the dolphin series? It's a really old one. I bet your mom did. Flipper? Have you ever seen that?
No.
Okay, well, that was kind of a popular show when I was growing up. You could talk about the training of dolphins. That would be an interesting thing. And how you can swim with dolphins at some places. And how dolphins and humans seem to be able to get along just fine. Intelligence wasn't one of your topics, right?
No.
Well, they are an extremely intelligent animal, and that would be a very interesting thing to talk about in the introduction, okay? So, if you look over on page 35 in your handbook, you will see just a little model of what your entire paper is going to look like. And one thing I want you to notice about the introduction is it's sort of shaped like a funnel. You start very broadly with something very general to catch your reader's attention. What you don't want to start with is something like this. If this is Julia's. Dolphins are amazing. Don't give away everything in your first sentence. Whales are amazing, or polar bears are amazing. You want to have something that has a little bit of intrigue for your reader. And then you're going to narrow down and give some time, place, background, or historical information about your subject, which is not included in your 3 topics. And then you're going to state your 3 topics. Now, they can be stated in one sentence altogether, or they could be stated in 3 different sentences. We'll look at some examples in just a minute. What you don't ever want to do is call them topics, and I don't want to see this in your paper at all. I don't want to see the word report, and I don't want to see the word topics. All right? You don't ever want to say something like, the 3 topics of this report are. So why not? What do you think's wrong with doing that?
Because it doesn't make a surprise for your reader. It just is like, oh, okay, I guess I'm
All
gonna
right.
read this.
So if it's not a surprise, it's kind of, what's the B word? You remember the B word, the great crime in writing?
Boring.
Boring. Yes. We don't ever talk about our writing. We would say something like, whales have a tragic history, amazing bodies, and intriguing migration. We don't say, these are the topics, because obviously if your reader is reading your paper, they know they're reading a paper, they know they're reading a report, they don't need to be told that, and to tell them that really just makes everything more boring. Okay, so that's the introduction. Now when we get to the conclusion, turn back to page 32. When we get to the conclusion, we're kind of going to go in reverse. The first thing we're going to do is restate our 3 topics, but not in the same way that you stated them in the introduction, because if you did it exactly the same way you did it in the introduction, it would be what?
Boring.
Boring. We don't ever want to be boring. And then you're going to talk about what you think is the most significant or the most important thing about your subject. And this isn't going to be one of your 3 topics. This is going to be more general, such as, let's see, Sammy, have you come to any amazing discoveries about whales while you've been writing about them? What's the most fascinating thing you think about whales?
I don't really know. I guess like all the different types are so different.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's great. So, and this is how we think. The way we think is by asking ourselves questions. So we think, what is the most interesting thing? What is the most important thing? What do I think is the most fascinating thing about my subject? So ask yourself that. I'm going to ask you that right now. Molly, what do you think is the most fascinating or intriguing or surprising or important thing that you found out about polar bears? What's your overall feeling about polar bears?
Like, what's the most interesting fact I know about them?
Well, not necessarily the most, well, just tell me an interesting fact and we'll reason out from that way. How about that?
Okay. They weigh 2,000 pounds. They can weigh.
That's pretty amazing. Okay, what would happen if we didn't have any polar bears? What would the world be like? Why are polar bears important? Why even have them? These are kind of hard questions, but this is what you do in order to think. You ask yourself these kinds of questions. I think the world would be a much less interesting place without huge animals like the polar bear. Don't you? Did you have something to say about that, Sammy?
There would be more beluga whales if it weren't for polar bears.
Oh, really? Do they eat them?
Yeah.
Wow. And how big are beluga whales?
What?
How big are they? Beluga whales?
They're pretty small, maybe about the size of a small car.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
There's like a quick website where you can look at a picture and it's literally a polar bear standing next to the spine of the beluga whale.
Oh, really? So what would happen if there weren't polar bears? I mean, they don't just eat beluga whales, they also eat seals and they eat, what else do they? Walruses. I mean, polar bears are kind of important, I think, probably in keeping balance in nature, right? Okay. Plus, they're just so amazing to look at. So you think about that. You think about what is the most important thing or the most amazing thing or the most that kind of thing, the most surprising thing. You spend some time asking yourself these questions. I mean, I would be sad if I knew there weren't any more polar bears. I mean, just knowing that they're out there kind of makes me happy, you know? Okay, now Julia, what about dolphins? What do you think is so great about dolphins?
That they can weigh up to 2,000 pounds.
Dolphins?
Yeah.
Wow, that is surprising. I had no idea. In fact, that would be an incredible thing to put in your introduction. That would be I guess a pretty big dolphin there. Okay, so now let's try to get away from just a particular fact about your subject. Let's think about dolphins in general. What would the world be like without dolphins? I mean, they're so friendly. Polar bears are not friendly. I think they're kind of vicious, aren't they? But I still like knowing they're out there. Okay, so what would a world without dolphins be like?
There might be less people because it's actually like known that dolphins like have saved people's lives from drowning.
Oh, well, that's an interesting idea. Okay, so maybe dolphins make the world a friendlier and safer place. Okay, now I'm not insisting that you use this. I'm just trying to help you think through what is important about my subject. Okay, this is what we want to do for an introduction and conclusion. Now, if you look on the next page, you'll see some important and interesting ways of starting an introduction to keep it from being boring. This is on page 33. So these are just ideas of ways you can start that will help get your reader's attention. And it's kind of fun. You can't always do it, but sometimes you can start with one idea and then echo it at the very end of the paper. So one really effective way of starting a paper is to ask a question. What would it be like to grow up during the Civil War? And this gets your reader thinking about your subject, and it catches their attention. And then this was from a paper that one of my students wrote about a main character in a story called Cadmus Henry. And then there was the whole paper about Cadmus Henry. And then at the very end of the paper, he ended up with a closing echo saying, Cadmus Henry is a great piece of historical fiction which helps readers visualize what it would be like to grow up during the Civil War. Okay? Another way of starting it is 3 very short sentences in a row. We call this it should say 3 SSS is what we really call them, but this is taking your short sentences and using 3 of them in a row, which can be kind of a catchy way of starting. Another way is with an unusual quote. Now, I say unusual because it's important that it be an interesting quote that everybody hasn't heard a million times. So there are lots of really great quotes in the world that have sort of been ruined because they've been used too much. Like, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Now, that's a great quote, but it's used too much. So you don't want to start your paper out with something that everybody else already used. Yes, Sammy?
Another one that's been used a lot is like, you're braver than you believe, stronger than, smarter than you think. Something like that.
Yes, I have been seeing that everywhere. Another thing that people use a lot, have you seen this one? I love you to the moon and back. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yeah.
I've been seeing it on artwork, all over everybody's Facebook. It's everywhere. It was really intriguing and interesting and inspiring the very first time I heard it, but after that it got old really fast because everybody's using it. Yes, Julia?
My friend actually just got a shirt that says "To the Moon and Back."
Well, my daughter has a pretty picture of that in my granddaughter's bedroom, so I can't be too tough on it. But what I'm saying is you don't want to start a paper with something that everybody uses, right? Now, here's a quote that I liked, and I put this on Facebook recently. I don't know if y'all eat biscuits and gravy in Connecticut. Do you?
Not
so
really.
much.
Okay, well, that's a big Southern thing, biscuits and gravy. So this was funny, I thought. I love you more than biscuits and gravy. So you think of something kind of weird that is a regional delicacy there, and say, I love you more than pizza. I love you more than, what's something that people eat up where you are that isn't something that everybody else gets to eat? You have a lot of seafood, right?
True.
Lobster.
Yep. Maine lobster, right? New England.
Oh yeah, every year the firehouse holds a fundraiser and they sell lobster.
Oh my word. I would go every time. I love you more than Maine lobster dipped in melted butter.
Now I'm
So,
hungry.
oh, me too. Okay, so when you use a quote, the easiest way to find a really good quote is to do what? What do you think?
Julia.
Say,
Let me see.
Google.
Yes. You Google it and you find out, let's see. Google quotes about dolphins.
Oh,
Let's
cool.
see. Okay, and let's see.
I normally just go to the images.
Oh, okay. I like Brainy quote. Oh, here we go. Here's a great quote. This would be really fun. My dream is to have a house on the beach, even just a little shack somewhere so I can wake up, have coffee, look at dolphins, be quiet, and breathe the air. That's pretty inspiring. It's really fun to find quotes.
I thought you weren't supposed to use the word I.
Okay, that's a good point, and let's talk about that for a minute. The only time you can use the word I or you or me or any of those banned words is if it's in a direct quote. All right? They're legal in a quote, and you don't ever change them. All right? Also, sometimes people want to put like a dash after the quote and then the person's name, but that's not the way we do it. Well, I'll show you that in just a minute. Similes and metaphors, that's comparing something to something else that really isn't the same thing. Like in this example, stainless steel clashes as a monumental battle rages in our kitchen. And this was an essay on sibling relationships. So is there really a monumental battle going on in their kitchen, do you suppose? Not a real battle. Not a real battle. So a simile and metaphor is a really neat way of starting. Let's skip dramatic opening and closing. Surprising, shocking, or bizarre fact. Now, this was an essay on credit cards, and this is pretty shocking if you know anything about money, but it might not be to some people. You have to know your audience. In 2000, the U.S. consumer debt reached an astounding high of $2.46 trillion. That's a lot of money. So one thing that wouldn't be a surprising, shocking, or bizarre fact that would be an interesting way to start out would be one that I read in an example once that was something like, I was 10 years old when we first visited our nation's capital. That's not really that interesting. So if you're going to start with a fact, make it a surprising, shocking, or bizarre fact, okay? And then also famous, exotic, glamorous, or notorious people, places, things, or ideas. If you can use something really fascinating as an interesting hook for people, for instance, the Bermuda Triangle. People think the Bermuda Triangle is really interesting. Polar bears, let's see. Eskimos are kind of exotic, right? People think of Eskimos, they think of exotic things. So if you started out with some exotic, interesting fact about Eskimos, that would be a neat way of starting for the polar bear paper. Okay? Let's look at a couple examples of these things. If you look on page 124.
124.
Uh-huh. So Devin wrote about knights, and I highlighted the topics in each of the paragraphs so you could see how all of these parts tie in together. But listen to his opening sentence, his attention getter. Banquets, battles, and bloodshed were all part of a typical day for the common knight. That sounds very exotic and interesting. He actually used an alliteration there where you actually start several words with the same sentence, same sound, and he has the B sound, banquets, battles, and bloodshed. Okay, now let's look at his interesting background information. Although he lived in a very brutal era, the code of chivalry dictated the knight's behavior on and off the battlefield. He vowed to uphold honor. The elite fighting class of the medieval age, which valiantly fought on horseback to great effect, was not all about battle. Okay, so he gives us some interesting information there. Now he's going to start talking about his 3 topics, and he chose to do 3 separate sentences for his 3 topics, but if you glance across on the next page, you can see that that particular introduction has all 3 topics in the same sentence. So it just depends on what works best for your paper. Having complex social classes and large influence in politics, the knights had to complete many steps on their pathway to knighthood because of the code. Okay, first topic, social classes. With their multitude of weapons and armor, knights made an impressive sight on the battlefield when charging. All right, what's his second topic there?
Weapons.
Weapons. Intelligently using efficient tactics, this fighting force soon became one of the most respected warrior classes in the whole medieval age. So what's his third topic?
What's the third topic?
Medieval age.
What's highlighted there?
Tactics.
Tactics. So we've got 3 topics: social classes, weapons, tactics. And he did a very good job making an interesting sentence introducing each of his 3 topics. Now, if you look down at the next paragraph, you'll see rank as his topic, and that's the same thing as social classes. That's just another way of saying social classes. All right. Then he talks all about that, and then his clincher is the word knights from the very first sentence. Okay, second body paragraph discusses what? What's there as his highlighted topic?
Weapons.
Weapons, and he uses that as part of his clincher in the last sentence. And the third body paragraph topic is?
What is it, Julian?
Weapons.
No, they just did weapons.
Oh,
Yeah, one more. Let's see, this will be battle tactics. Okay. And you can see tactics highlighted in the last sentence. So he discusses all of his 3 topics thoroughly, and now let's look at his conclusion. The social structure, weapons, and battle tactics of knights. Now, you could have done 3 different sentences again if you had wanted to, but he did them all in one sentence this time. Define the mystique of their order. Still today, here's a little bit of extra information where he ties this into what he thinks is important. Knights in shining armor rescue damsels in distress within many famous fairy tales and movies. And here's his most important. Most importantly, even though the knights' power quickly diminished, their amazing courage and valor in the battlefield was admirable. Even though eventually they became obsolete and inefficient, respect for knights endures because of their great strength and courage. Okay, so you can see how all of these parts fit together like Lego blocks. That's what you want with a good paper. You want everything tied tightly together using your topics and connecting them from your introduction and your conclusion. And I want you to see another thing that we do between the introduction and the conclusion. Look at the last sentence of the introduction. Intelligently using efficient tactics, this fighting force soon became one of the most respected warrior classes in the whole medieval age. And then look at the very last sentence of the conclusion. Even though eventually they became obsolete and inefficient, respect for knights endures because of their great strength and courage. So the last sentence of the introduction should tie into your last sentence of the conclusion. It's sort of like a clincher between the introduction and the conclusion, which is another way of connecting them. Do you notice a word there that is used in both the last sentence of the introduction and the last sentence of the conclusion?
Respect.
That's right. Now, another way of tying the whole thing together is to take some keywords from the last sentence of the conclusion and use it to create your title. So his title is...
What's the title, ladies?
Honorable and skillful.
Okay, and what words do you think go with that in the last sentence of the conclusion? Do you see some words that are sort of similar?
Respect and honorable.
Respect. Well, yeah, respect is there. Last sentence of the conclusion. Respect. What?
Strength and courage.
Yeah, strength and courage. That would be something to honor somebody for. So, are those exactly the same words that he used in the last sentence?
No.
No. But you can see how they tie together, right? Okay. So that's a really good example. If you look at the Mexico one, you'll see the same thing. The topics are, the one on the very next page, the topics are history, people, and economy. So Kayla started out by giving some, she starts out with an interesting fact. The country we call Mexico is located in the northern and western hemispheres. We really shouldn't have the word there. It should be the country named Mexico. So that's not, and a good example of how not to do that. I need to cross that out. All right, and then she gives some background information, some geographic information about Mexico. Mexico is in North America, although it seems like a tropical South American country. This vast country, which is greater than Alaska and California combined, is covered in jungles, mountains, and deserts. Along the edges of the country is the Sierra Madre, 3 mountain ranges that run down one side of Mexico and up the other. Another landform of this varied nation is the Baja Peninsula. While part of it is extremely mountainous, the other portion is parched, dry desert. Unlike the Baja Peninsula, the Yucatan Peninsula is overgrown with lush green jungle. This seemingly South American country is exotic in its geography. Distinctly, Mexico is a land of many contrasts in its people, history, people, and economy. So she talks all about the geographic information, and then she gets down to her 3 topics. And if you go through and you check each of the highlighted parts, you'll see that she talks about the 3 topics in order. Sorry. And then let's look at her conclusion. Mexico is a blend of the old world and the new world, of an ancient culture and a modern civilization. Its arid and exotic landscape is different from most of North America. The Spanish and Indian ancestors created a unique cultural heritage. That's topic 1. Whether the people are urban or rural, they are part of a magnificent collage. Number 2, economically, modernization is taking hold of Mexico. That's number 3. And then her concluding sentence with her most significant. The blend of this old and new culture are the most significant ingredients of present-day Mexico. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So I'm using sentence types in the introduction and conclusion because I didn't hear them in that paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah, we are using them, and I don't have them marked on here. So just don't worry about that for this particular example. But yes, in all of the others do, except they're not marked bolded like I normally have them. So yeah, you need to have at least 6 sentences in each paragraph, and all sentence types need to be used in the introduction and in the conclusion. I don't know. I guess I think I ended up scanning these things and I lost some of this stuff when I did it, but probably with Kayla's, I don't know why they're not all in there, but just ignore that. That's a very good question. Why should we use all of our style in our introduction and conclusions? Yes. Sammy.
Because if we're trying to start with a bang and end with echo, if they're really dull, because it's like the same words over and over and not really like creative words, then it won't really.
Right. That's the whole point of the style, right? To make our writing more.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think some IEW teachers don't make their students include their style in the introduction and conclusion, but of all places, that's probably the most important to have really good style, because introductions and conclusions can be very boring. And so all of these things that we're learning to do keep them from being boring and help them to be as interesting as the rest of the paper. And so if you can capture your reader in the introduction, they'll usually stick with you. That's a really good thing to do, is to really make sure your introduction shines and to keep working on it until you've got it down to your most creative writing that you can make it. Well, I'm just going to show you about, we're going to be doing a works cited page for this. And so I want to show you about using EasyBib. Turn your handbooks over to page 128. Just like our headings on our papers and the margins and all of that kind of thing, works cited pages are dictated by the MLA format. And there are very specific rules about creating a works cited page. But what I want you to see on this one is the odd format that works cited pages appear in. When you do your works cited page, it's called a works cited page. When I was in school, it was called bibliography, but now it has to be works cited and it has to be done exactly like you see here. When you do your works cited page, all of the margins again are 1 inch, but there's some really strange rules for works cited. And I finally have figured out why they did it this way. It makes sense once you realize what it is they're trying to do. But notice how everything is lined up on the left-hand side of the page. Do you see that?
In the book or on the screen?
In the book, on page 128.
Yeah.
Okay. The only time there's an indentation is if the works cited entry is longer than 1 line. If there's longer than 1 line, on the second line, you indent 5 spaces. That does not look like 5 spaces, but it was. I guess I need to go back and fix that. And the reason that it's done this way is if you're looking for a particular resource when you're looking at the works cited page, it's much easier if your eye can just go straight down the margin instead of having to look at indentions. Okay, so we know that all of those words that are lined up on the left-hand side of the page on page 128 are individual and different citations. Notice something else. Just glancing over them, how do you think that these have been arranged? Does any pattern jump out at you?
Alphabetically.
Exactly. So you always alphabetize your works cited, and whether it's a work cited by the author's last name or whether it's a work cited by the name of a book or the name of an article, all of them are done in alphabetical order. So Alder, John, that's an author's name. Baylor, Bill, author's name. Brant, Keith, author's name. Brown, William, author's name. Coyote. Now that's not an author's name. You can tell by it being in print and quotation marks also that it's also not the name of a book. It is the name of an article, and it's an encyclopedia article. Then we have another name, Drabble, and hers takes up 2 lines. Then we have another name, Fuller. Then we have another, what do you suppose this is?
What does it look like?
It's in quotation marks, so we know that it is an article. Right. And then the last one is also an article. But notice that they're still all in alphabetical order, whether it's an author's name or whether it's the title of an article. Okay? Now let me show you how to use EasyBib, because this is the easiest way to go about creating your works cited page. MLA is constantly changing, and I don't think they've quite caught up on EasyBib with the new changes. Let me give you an article to do first. An article from the Revolution. This is one called Our Kids Are Busy, but Are They Really Being Challenged? All right, if I wanted to cite this on my works cited page, I can copy and paste the web address. Look here at the top of EasyBib. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. You have choices here: website, book, video or film, journal, database, all 59 options. There's all kinds of things that you can cite. And if you don't see it there at the top, you go into all 59 options and you can find newspaper articles, online databases. There's all kinds of things, but mostly these are usually what you'll be using. So I go to the one called website. I paste in my web address and click Cite It. And they always want you to think about whether you're using a credible source. That's what all these questions are about.
Did you watch this, Julia? Okay.
It says they're still gathering my information. Let's see. All right. Now, none of it came up. Let me see. Let me go back again and try that again. This is not a very good example. Cite it. Well, I don't know why it's not bringing. Oh, there we go. Okay. You see, it didn't work the first time, but it worked this time. So I look to see if what they brought up is what I'm really looking for, and it looks like it is. So I'm going to click Cite This. All right. Continue to the final step. Now, this is much improved because it used to just make the citation without asking you all these things. So I need to see if I can find out who the author is. Let's see. The author is Greg Harris. Greg Harris. Oops.
I have no idea.
All right. The publisher, sometimes if they don't have the publisher, you can look down at the bottom.
Look where she's looking.
looks like you have to be a little bit of a detective when you do this. And it looks like to me the publisher is just The Revolution. So I'm just going to leave that blank because it doesn't list a particular author. Now, this date is very important. Lots of times it'll create it without the date, but you need to go make sure and see if you can find a date. Let's see if we can find a date. We can't find a date on the actual page, but we can find it up here in the web address. And that's 10/2017. So I'm going to put that in.
Actually, it says published on November 14th, 2017.
Where is that?
Next to where it says the art.
Oh, I see it. Okay, 10/14/2017. Okay, great. I missed that. Good catch. All right, 14/10/2017. I don't think there was a timestamp. All right, let me just look one more time and see if I see anything about a particular. I think they're their own publisher, but I don't know. Maybe I should do Alex and Brett Harris. I don't know. I'll just try that and see how that works. How about that? Alex and Brett Harris. All right. Now that I've finished putting in all the information I can find, I click Create Citation. And there it is. Now, here's the tricky part. And I am going to put a recording of this class up online so you can look at it, because this gets people confused every time. Don't fall for this copy and paste citation thing. It does not work right. Come down here to the bottom, click your citations. You can keep adding citations and they'll appear in the right order, which is very amazing. And now, once you've clicked the check mark, we're going to click Export.
See that?
And when we click Export, it brings up this list, and we're going to click Print as Word Doc. Molly, I guess you'll try Save to Google Docs, okay? Don't ever go with copy and paste because it just doesn't turn out right. I don't know why. So I'm going to click Print as Word Doc. Now I'm going to do Download from Microsoft Word. And I'm going to open it. At least I'm going to try to open it. There we go. Then you can take this information and copy and paste it onto a separate page in your document for your report. Just don't do it from EasyBib. And here we have our downloaded Microsoft Word Works Cited page. It's perfectly formatted. All of the margins are 1 inch. Everything is double spaced. It's 12-point font. It's Times New Roman. We have in the first set of information the author's name, last name, comma, first name, period. Then we have the title of the article, and it's in quotation marks because it's an article. It does have a question mark. That's part of the title, so it shows up there. If it doesn't have a question mark, if it's just, if there's no punctuation in the title, then you would just have a period, because this is going to be separated as a section of information with a period. The next set of information is the website, the publisher. These are all separated by commas. Date. Notice how the date is done. It's 14 October 2017, and October is abbreviated because it's a month that has more than 4 letters in the name. May, June, and July.
all are spelled out, but everything else has more than 4 letters, and so you're abbreviating it. Then there is another comma, and there's the URL, the actual web address. There is something missing here. Even though it shows up in the information for EasyBib, for some reason it doesn't show up in the citation when they format it. So you have to put this in on Internet Articles, and that is the date that you actually accessed it. So we're just going to put in today's date. Access 14 November 2017, and of course we're abbreviating November because that's more than 4 letters. And so there is the correctly formatted works cited for the article that we just did.
Let me just show you this very quickly. This book, I would have put the information in under book on EasyBib. Click on book, and this book is an easy one, Do Hard Things. And I'm going to do cite it. Let me try it again. Ah, there we go. It seems like I'm having to do it twice every time. Okay, so that's it. See, there was a Spanish version listed below, and that's not the one I'm using, so make sure you pick the actual version that you're using. And let's see if there's any missing information. Okay, it's not orange anywhere, so all of the information is there. I'm going to click Create Citation. Here's the citation. Don't do copy and paste. Come down to the bottom. Now we're going to click both of these. Notice how they're in alphabetical order. We're going to do Export, Print as Word Doc, Download for Microsoft Word.
Now let's look at our revised works cited page that includes the book that we just did on EasyBib. Notice that we now have 2 entries, and they are in alphabetical order because Harris Alex comes before Harris Greg. Here's the book, and you'll see we have 2 authors, Harris Alex and Brett Harris. The second or third or however many authors you have, the rest of them have first name, last name, followed by a period. The book title is in italics. That's the correct way to format a book title. As we mentioned before, articles are formatted by just putting quotation marks around them. Something that has changed in EasyBib in MLA since I first started doing this, in fact, it's fairly recent, is that we don't include the city of publication now. So all we have are the author, the title, the publisher, and the publication date, followed by a period. So we have a period after the author, we have a period after the title, we have a comma after the publisher, and then a period after the date. Now, since we did a revised edition of this, of course, EasyBib didn't put in the access date for your website. So if you go back and you revise your works cited page on EasyBib, you're still going to have to go back and put in the same thing that we put in before, and that was the date that you accessed the article that you were using. So it was 14 November 2017 with a period. And that's how you would do a works cited page with more than one source. Mostly you'll have more than 2 sources. And every source that you add will need to be put in alphabetical order. Sometimes it's the author's name. Sometimes if there is no author listed, it is the article name. Sometimes it's an editor name. But notice how these are lined up on the side, so you can just glance down and you can easily find the last name or the first letter of the source that you're looking for.